In a dark part of the Bible, there is a story that reads more like a fairy tale with a lesson than a holy lesson. In the most troubling parts of the book of Judges, a story comes to light that makes us think about what is right and wrong. That story, which is hidden in chapters 19 and 21, is so heavy that we don't think young hearts or ears should hear it. And why, out of all the stories that have been kept alive, does this one stay as a sad ghost in the middle of the Old Testament? What does it tell us about the Israelites in the past and about ourselves now? These questions aren't just empty words. It gets to the heart of a truth that is both dark and necessary for us to fully understand how the scriptures show both human and divine parts. What happens when we read these scary stories again in current times? Is the unease we feel as we read these pages a sign of how far we've come as moral beings, or a warning of the dark sides of our nature that still dance around us? We will try to find clear answers that help us understand not only the past, but also the moral difficulties of our own time by breaking down the events in Judges. At the beginning of the story, we meet a Levite, a holy person who lives in the high remote parts of Ephraim. This man is in danger of being betrayed because his life is tied to a woman from Bethlehem in Judah. She breaks off her marriage and goes back to live with her dad because she cheated on her husband. The Levite chooses to find his partner and get things back in order in his home because he wants to make peace and feels socially responsible. When he gets to Bethlehem, the father of his wife greets him with kindness that ranges from warm to reluctant. The Levite gets caught in a circle of hospitality that shows how complicated family relationships can be and how people behaved in that time. They are both gently asked to leave and invited to stay longer. He and his mistress set out for Ephraim because he was determined to come back, but their trip takes a strange turn. They go to Jebeah to stay safe at night, but the community there isn't friendly and doesn't want to help them, so it shuts its doors. In the town square, where they are weak and alone, an old man finally welcomes them and offers to let them stay the night at his house. This act of kindness comes at a time when people are clearly angry at them. As the night goes on, the story goes deeper into sad and scary events that show not only what the characters did, but also the moral and ethical problems they are facing. We have to look at both the dark parts of our own lives and the Bible's history as we go through these terrible events. When we think about those times, we try to find lessons that connect with how we think about faith, morals, and what it means to be human today. The elder of Jebeah had offered Levite and his friends a place to stay and extra care at the start of the night. Offering only a pillow as a request, he had found shelter and a place to rest after a long trip. In their society, hospitality is an important virtue that seemed to have brought them some peace during the uncertain trip. However, the peace of the night was broken quickly. Not only did the darkness bring the cover of night, but it also brought the evil that lived in the shades of Jebeah. Because they were evil, the men from the city circled the house and slammed the door shut. The desire was very clear and terrible. They wanted Levite and told him to do horrible things. In the dark, the stress spread like a flame that can't put out anything. An old man came out when he heard the threat and begged people to be decent so he could save his friend from a terrible fate. He offered his own daughter and the Levite's mistress as an offering in a last-ditch effort to make peace, a plan that makes us feel cold and tests our sense of what is right and wrong. It was the price he was willing to pay to avoid a worse crime, a choice that would have terrible results. The men weren't happy, so they wouldn't bargain. In a terrible act of desperation, the Levite gave his mistress to the wild men of the city. After that, there was a night of non-stop horror and violence. The woman was abused in horrible ways, and the violence didn't stop until dawn. At dawn, she was left for dead, worn out and sad. The scene that played out in the grey morning light was so cruel that words can't even begin to describe it. The concubine used all of her last bit of strength to crawl back to the house where she had taken shelter. She fell down on a doorway, and her hands were still on the cold ground that separated the safe place from the hell she had lived through. There was more to that story than just bloodshed. It shows the darker parts of people's souls and is a test of faith and humanity. One morning, when the Levite opened the door, he saw that his mistress was being cared for. He felt the weight of his choices. It's quiet after that, and it's full of guilt, pain, and the agony of a dawn that doesn't bring light. Only a shadow that stays with you of what was lost. This part of the book of Judges makes us think about both the horrible things that were said and the moral choices we have to make when we are desperate. The story isn't just a look into the past, it's also a lesson on how we can be kind and fair even when terrible things happen. How do we deal with the dark sides of our personalities and the choices that can shape who we are as people? At the start of a new day, the Levite had to face a sad truth. He had asked his woman to leave, but she had not come. Because of the violence the night before, she died, leaving him with pain and duty. In complete quiet, he put his dead body on a donkey and started the long, sad journey home. The heavy silence made the trip even worse. When the Levite got home, he was filled with a mix of anger and hopelessness. He was so angry that he took out a knife and, in a very symbolic and horrible act, cut his concubine's body into 12 pieces. He did that horrible thing to show how much pain he was in, as well as to warn everyone in Israel. Along with each piece, a letter telling how his mistress was treated badly by the Benjaminites was sent to one of the 12 tribes. The 12 groups were shocked when they got the pieces that had been marked with violence. When people saw the bodies and read the letters, they felt sick and shocked all over the area. They all said at the same time, "This hasn't happened since we left Egypt." The cruelty of the act showed a society that had forgotten what it meant to be human and follow the rules. The story goes back to the beginning of chapter 19 to stress a very important point. Moral decline can happen when people don't take charge or lead others. In those days, Israel did not have a king. This repetition is not just a fact of history, it is a call to think about how important it is to have structures of power and duty. The Levite says that without them, people are likely to act in ways that are not fair or right. The second lesson says some harsh things about how the master and the Levite himself acted. The older man gave the Levite his daughter and his mistress, which shows an unsettling order of human values. This part of the story asks us to see and honor the sacredness of all life, no matter what kind it is or what kind of state it is in. It's a strong message that we are all made in the image of God and should be treated with respect and honor. This story is full of action and moral lessons. It shows the problems that a society has when it doesn't have a clear goal. The Levites' acts, even though they were very bad, are seen as a way to wake up all of Israel. The story makes us think about how values can fade when there is no moral direction, and how violent acts can lead to changes that are needed. Now that this part of the story is over, we can take a moment to think about what these lessons mean for us now. How can we use the need to be responsible and value human life in the modern world? What can the stories of our past teach us about the choices we make now? We are asked to not only look back, but also to look inside ourselves and think about our own ideals and actions. As we continue to dig deeper into the Book of the Young, we find lessons that go beyond the story of history and offer important lessons for modern life. One of those thoughts talks about the risks of doing degrading things on the internet, which is a very important problem in our digital society. It is important to see each picture on the screen not as something to be consumed, but as a representation of God. This point of view not only makes us think about what we do, But it also tells us to respect the inherent worth of every person. Just picturing a close person, like a daughter or a friend, in that situation should be enough to change how we act. The story about the young people in the book makes it very clear how breaking moral and spiritual rules can cause us to do horrible things. When we separate ourselves from the lessons and the divine, we open ourselves up to making mistakes we wouldn't have thought of before. This distance not only throws people off, but it can also start a chain of bad choices that have terrible results. The struggle between the Israelite groups is a powerful example of what happens when people do things that aren't in line with morality or God's laws. The terrible crime that the tribe of Benjamin committed led directly to the civil war that broke out and killed thousands of people. This success shows how choices made by one person can cause problems on a national level. There are effects that come from every choice we make that we can't always see or control. The sad end of this civil war, which almost wiped out the Benjamin tribe, is a strong warning that what we do has long-lasting effects that affect not only us, but also the whole community. We are asked to think about our own lives and the choices we make every day as we think about these events. How can we be sure that what we do is in line with our core values? How can we live our lives in a way that is in line with ideas that are good for us and the people around us? At the end of this part of the book of Judges, there is a call to think about your life and make a promise to live a good one. You should read the last few parts of this Bible book not just as a history lesson, but also as a look at your own minds and our society as a whole, so that we can learn from our mistakes and not make the same ones again. As we learn more about the story of the book of Judges, we see how a long-running battle ends after a lot of bad choices and terrible results. The fight between the Israelite groups and the Benjaminites shows a truth that can't be avoided. We can pick what we do, but most of the time we can't change what happens afterward. The story shows a vicious loop in which every action leads to a response that is usually just as bad or worse. The 11 tribes' choice to attack Benjamin was based on their desire for justice, but it almost wiped out an entire tribe. This shows that seeking justice with angry hands can have tragic results. Following the terrible fight, the Israelites were in a moral and social bind. How to make the promise not to marry off their girls and the need to protect the tribe of Benjamin worked together. The acts that led to the answer being found were just as controversial. The remaining Benjaminites were told to kidnap women for themselves during a holiday, which only made the circle of violence and hopelessness worse. The choice to allow kidnapping during a holiday not only went against basic morals, but it also shows how a country's morals are falling apart as it moves away from its core values. This success wasn't just a desperate one-off. It was a sign of a bigger problem in Israel with its leadership and morals. When we look at how these choices have affected people, we see a world of pain that goes beyond the people who were directly affected. The women who were taken from their homes in Jabesh Gilead and the towns there are clear examples of how the actions of a few can affect many, often those who had nothing to do with the original disputes. This part of the story makes you think deeply about ethics and leadership. In their efforts to solve a problem, the Israeli leaders made decisions that hurt their morals even more. This choice shows how important it is to have leaders who are smart and moral, who look for fair answers without putting society's core values at risk. The story also makes me think about how people gradually turned away from God, which is talked about in the book of Judges. Not only the decisions that were made, but also the general decline of the society that made those choices show how far apart people are. People who don't have a spiritual relationship with God are seen as a major cause of moral decline and rising violence. When we read these upsetting stories, they make us think about our own lives and the choices we've made. Why is it important to learn from past mistakes so that they don't happen again? What can we do to make sure that what we do helps make our community more fair and caring? At the end of this section, there is a call to action for current listeners to understand how important every choice is and how it can have a big or small effect. It pushes people to actively think about their choices and think about not only their own well-being, but also the well-being of the community and future generations. With its many layers of conflict, mistake, and redemption, the story of the Benjamites and the other Israelite groups is a strong lesson in how complicated life is. We are reminded of our duty as individuals and as part of a community whose actions affect people far beyond our direct reach as this part of the story comes to a close. Before I talk about how the God's grace was shown and how the Benjamites were rebuilt, I want you to think about how the choices we make affect the people around us. If you like this trip of learning and thought, you might want to subscribe to our channel and click the bell to make sure you don't miss any of our future studies. We can learn more about the things that history has to teach us if we work together. Continuing with the story. After a series of terrible events that changed the tribe of Benjamin and the other Israelite tribes greatly, the story ends with a conclusion that, even though it is sad, gives room for redemption and rebuilding. The Havs Plomo women were taken from their lives and made to heal the wounds of a group that was almost wiped out by violence between brothers. The Benjamites are in danger of being wiped out completely, but they see their desperate actions as a chance to rebuild their towns and their lives. The slow process of recovering their traditions and communities starts with the women who were taken during the fair. The stones that were used to build their new homes were a reflection of the choices they had made in the past and the hope of a fresh start. The reveal of divine grace is one of the most important parts of this part of the story. Even though the Benjamites and the other Israelite groups have failed and done bad things, God does not leave them totally. This grace doesn't change the results of their actions, but it does give them a way back, a chance to be forgiven, which is very important for restoring order and morals among the people. The story makes you think about how people make choices and the results that they always have. In the book of Judges, every choice the characters made had consequences that went far beyond what they expected or wanted. Often, these consequences affected not only their own lives, but also the lives of many others. The book of Judges finishes on a sad but strong note. Israel did not have a king at that time. They all did what they thought was right. This saying strikes a chord as a reminder of how important moral leadership and personal accountability are. If everyone only does what's best for themselves and doesn't think about what's best for everyone else, chaos and destruction often rule. At the end of this trip through the book of Judges, we have a better understanding of how complicated people are and how important it is to seek knowledge and direction when making decisions. As we look at our own lives, the story of the Benjamites, which is full of mistakes and doubts, acts as a mirror, showing us that even though we can make choices, we have to live with the results of those choices. May this story not only help you understand holy books better, but also make you think about how you live your own life. May you make wise choices and find grace on your way. If you found this story interesting or helpful, please share it with others who might also find it useful. Please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below telling us how these thoughts have changed the way you think about life and the choices you make. Your participation makes our group stronger and helps get important words out there. Thank you for following us to the end of this amazing story. May God be with you always. Amen.